be standing by should you need any assistance. We do have emotional support in each room labeled support. So thank you, Michelle, for being here with us today. It is my pleasure to be in this session with your main speakers, Britta Clay and Doreen Horan. I will begin by briefly sharing the CNC plan for postvention implementation with you all. So let me get to that slide. Let's see. Awesome. So postvention is the work that we do after a suicide occurs in the community. So when I think postvention, it really is prevention when we think about suicide contagion and what happens after a suicide occurs. So you are in a great pillar. I'm very passionate about it. So when we work on postvention implementation, we are doing prevention. So what the CNC has asked of us in this pillar is survivor outreach and support. So what that will look like is involving service members, veterans, and families with the postvention team working around the veteran and service member communities. We will also conduct outreach to mental health centers and behavioral health and substance use disorder treatment agencies, faith organizations, school districts, higher ed settings, and coroners to support in the development and protocol of policies. And I'm just going to minimize you all. We will identify one high-risk industry to support the development of policy for survivor outreach and support. So that could be construction, certain types of businesses, and the postvention team will decide on what industry that is. We will also disseminate survivor support resource information to major media outlets annually, which I'll talk about next. And we are hosting an International Survivors of Suicide Loss Day. That's currently on November 21st, but of course, with the pandemic, it is subject to change, but we will be doing something for that day. So like I said, responsible messaging and media reporting. This is going to be ensuring that the media reports in Larimer County have the ability and the knowledge to report responsibly on suicides in the community or responding to what happens afterwards. So that'll be helping the media in the community developing proper outreach and ensuring that their journalism is up to date. So annually, we will have written policies for them and we'll guide them on how to write that, and we'll promote support and encourage linkages to support for those bereaved by suicide attempt or loss. And just really when we're talking about suicide in media, ensuring that it is in a positive manner for those survivors. So, for example, currently there's a lot of people reporting on suicide rates are increasing because of COVID-19. And we know that that's not true. It's actually false advertising because we don't have the data for that. So that is harmful advertising. So what the CNC is asking us to do is to go to those companies and ask them, hey, can we report on that the crisis center is receiving more calls, which is actually a positive thing because it means that people are reaching out and receiving the help that they need. So really ensuring that media is positive. And like I talked about earlier, we really want to provide awareness, training, and education to the communities listed here. So if you are a part of the community mental health centers, the government, coroners, faith communities, everyone here, we want you to be a part of the postvention team in order to implement these efforts and provide the proper resources. So the postvention team is the force behind this pillar. It consists of community members and partners who are passionate about suicide prevention. So if you're interested in being part of the postvention team, you will contact me. This is my personal email. As well as I do help co-facilitate our heartbeat support group for those who have lost someone to suicide. We have an adult-specific group and a teen-specific group. So if you know anyone that is or could benefit from those groups, please reach out to me. And this will also be a part of the post survey. So when you take the post survey, we'll ask if you're interested in these work groups or trainings, and you'll provide your email so I can get your information that way as well. So that is enough for me. Thank you for listening to my spiel, and I will now turn it over to Britta Davis.
Thanks, Kiera. Can everyone hear me? Hopefully. Okay, good. Well, I'm really glad to see so many people in this group. I didn't know really what to expect. This is my first time teaching via Zoom. I don't love it because I love the in-person contact, but I guess that's our new way of doing things. So like Kiera said, my name is Britta. I just got married, so my last name just changed. So I don't even know my last name half the time, but it is now Davis. And I've been with Fort Collins Police Department for about 13 years now. So in my role, I'm the victim specialist with the police department, and we respond to basically do the crisis work for all victims of crime, specific to the Victims' Rights Amendment, which is going to be any crime against a person. But we also do a lot with just victims of circumstance. So car crashes, and when somebody dies in the home, suicide, of course, is included in that. So we do a lot of response with that. My background is in trauma. I've studied the impacts of trauma for years and train all of our law enforcement officers, our detectives, first responders on what trauma looks like and how we can effectively communicate with somebody and support them while in trauma. So I wanted to talk today just a little bit about the first response for after somebody dies by suicide, as far as the law enforcement perspective and what our response is and how we partner with community groups. So Fort Collins Police, we respond to obviously any case within the city limits. I will let you know that Larimer County Sheriff's Office also has a victim advocate team that does exactly the same thing. CSU the police department has advocates that respond to sexual assault, but we usually help and step in when there is a suicide on campus or involving a CSU student. And I know that the sheriff's office also helps Loveland Police Department. So we try to have all of Larimer County covered as far as the immediate response. So if I will give a little disclaimer, it is extremely important to have trauma-informed language when we're talking about trauma and when you're working with a victim. And so when I'm out on scene, the language I use with the survivor is very different than when I teach. So when I teach, I'm going to use more legal terms. I will say the body, which we never say on scene. I will talk about autopsy. I'm going to use terms that are more the legal side of things. But please know that when I'm interacting with somebody who just lost a loved one by suicide, those are not the terms I use. So I'll kind of go over that too. So that's my little disclaimer. So in the state of Colorado, when anybody dies in their home and it's not under the care of a doctor like hospice, law enforcement is required to respond. So anytime there's going to be somebody who dies by suicide, always expect a full law enforcement response, starting with our patrol officers. So our patrol officers will be the first responders. They will go to the scene, whether that be the home, outside in a car, wherever that may be, and make sure the scene is completely secure and kind of figure out where to go from there. Usually when it's, we say an apparent suicide, it sometimes depends on the means that were used. Either way, it's going to create an entire response from the police department. So usually the first phone call I feel like cops make is to our victim services group, because if there's a friend or family member on scene, their trauma level is extremely high. So they want to get services and support to that person immediately. So we respond very quickly. And then usually after that, we will have investigators respond. Almost always a detective is going to come out, and the coroner investigator. There's a lot of people. So it can get very overwhelming for family. So kind of with that, what our role is as a victim advocate is really first and foremost to provide support, do some crisis counseling, Sometimes there's nothing to say, so it's just meeting the victim where they're at, being in that moment with them, holding their hand, whatever they need at that time. And then at some point, there's no doubt they're going to have questions about what's going to happen and what's today going to look like. So really trying to guide them through that process, because it's a lot. And it's, even though we're there to help, it can be very invasive, and it's really overwhelming. So one thing we really try to do is explain to them all the people coming in and out. So there's going to be uniformed officers. There's going to be at least 1 or 2 detectives, if not more. Our forensic services unit is probably going to come out and do the actual processing of the crime scene. Then the coroner investigator will get there. And really the coroner investigator is who has total jurisdiction. So they are going to decide, if we need a search warrant. They're going to decide if we need the family to leave the home. And if so, that's something that we help with trying to get them to the police department, maybe to do interviews, getting them to a friend or family member's house, the neighbor's house, wherever we can find that's going to be private for a family. So it's a lot of moving parts that happen pretty quickly. So that's kind of just the beginning stages. Every case is going to look a little bit different. A lot of what we do, like I said, is the education, but also trying to get that family support. So if we need to call friends and family members to come to the scene and support, we'll definitely do that. Being in a college town, it is not unusual for the next of kin or the immediate family to not be on scene. Maybe it's a friend or a roommate who, found their friend that just died by suicide. We kind of treat it like we would a mass casualty, and our first priority is going to be the next of kin for that family. So by law, the coroner's office has to make any kind of death notification, but that's something that victim advocates will absolutely assist with, or detectives will assist with. And that's something that time-wise we want to do pretty quickly, because the last thing we want is for a family member to find out that their son or daughter or spouse just died, and they find out on Facebook or social media or by a friend of a friend. So we really try to get going on that as quickly as we can and make sure that we send somebody in person to make that notification. That's something that will always stick with a family member, of how they found out that their loved one died. So we really try to treat that as sensitively as we can and as quickly as we can. But we also have to make sure we are identifying the right people. There's nothing worse, and it has happened, where a family has been notified that their child just died, their teenager, and it turns out it wasn't their teenager. So we really have to make sure that we're doing what's right. And like I said, the coroner takes full responsibility of that. We just assist. So that's always a top priority for us, educating people on scene to please not use their cell phones, telling them we really need to make contact with the family the best way we can. So there's a lot of that going on. It's not uncommon for friends and family to start showing up. So trying to meet them at the front door so they don't see more than, they don't really see anything. So there's just a lot of moving parts when we're out on scene. Even though I'm there to help the victim, I am still an agent of law enforcement. And so, unfortunately, sometimes it's my job to tell them that right now, they can't go in that room. Right now, they can't go see their son that just died. The coroner makes that ultimate decision, but until those parties get there, I have to kind of lock that down. So it's sometimes really tough for the family being told what they can and can't do when they're grieving. It's really a hard thing to navigate. So I think that's the biggest piece of what we do on scene, is really trying to guide them through what this is going to look like, and then the follow-up of what comes next. It's usually several hours that we're out there. There's always a possibility that they can't go back to their home that night. So we really try to figure out where they can stay. Do we need to get a hotel? Where are they going to be most comfortable? Make sure they have what they needed from the house at the time. And then really giving them a reasonable expectation of the time frame and what this is going to look like. It's so hard to get caught up in not wanting to sugarcoat things and try to not make them sound as bad. But I feel like the more that we try to sugarcoat things and tell them that we'll get them back in as soon as possible, the more it almost looks like we're trying to hide something. So I'm all about transparency and explaining to families, This is why we're doing this. This is why we're taking pictures. This is why we can't let you see your child right now. And let's talk about that, because usually they're not okay with it. And I get that. So letting them kind of work through them, processing that. So the first several hours, I would say, through the first day is really just trying to educate and support them as much as we can. And then very quickly getting community resources involved. So it used to be, especially when it was the death of a child, that Three Helpful Hearts would come out with us. And what we have found is, being that agent of law enforcement, maybe doing the death notification, maybe telling that mom several times she can't go in the basement to see her child right now, I really am become a trigger for that mom or that dad or that loved one, and kind of relate, they'll look at me and relate back to the investigation of what was happening. And that was kind of happening with our Three Helpful Hearts volunteers that came out, or with Betsy and Kristen. And so they weren't going through Three Helpful Hearts for the long-term grief companion support. And that's really what's needed. So we've kind of done a referral process now where either that day or the following day, I will tell the family that, I'm going to have my partner with Three Helpful Hearts give them a call. If they say no, that's totally their choice, but I usually just phrase it as they're going to call you and support you. So we kind of do more of a referral process, which I think has been way more beneficial. I feel like families stick with Three Helpful Hearts. I'll never forget, a couple years ago, I responded to a home of a woman who had just found her son. He had died by suicide in the basement by strangulation. So he leaned into a ligature. So really horrific, and see this. So I was basically on the kitchen floor with her for hours, and I had to keep telling her that we couldn't let her downstairs right now. And it was really difficult for her. She had no other family. So I was with her most of the day. And I saw her 2 days later at a Three Helpful Hearts event. And she looked at me, and I tried to kind of walk away because I have no idea what reaction I'm going to have. And she said, I couldn't remember your face, but she said, your voice and your eyes. She said, that's all I can remember. And clearly I was a trigger for her. So I quickly exited and told Kristen. So it just really, we start to be associated with that trauma. And so it's hard for us to really provide a lot of the long-term support that's needed. So Three Helpful Hearts is a huge referral for us. If it's an adult, Pathways is a huge referral that we make all the time. We work really closely with CSU and Front Range, the school districts. If it is a child or a member of the school district, usually we notify the school resource officer immediately. It's very rare that the SRO doesn't come out to the scene and provide support. We get the Poudre School District Crisis Team on board. So we really try to set up long-term services, not only for the primary family, but then we also look at close friends, close family, employers, the community as a whole. So there's a lot of kind of that ripple effect that we really try to take into account and make sure that those services are met for as many people as possible. Following kind of the next few days, I usually do make contact again, depending on the situation, just to let them know where we're at with the investigation. Even though suicide is not a crime, because of the way that usually it presents, especially when it's a violent means that was used, we have to treat it as if it was a crime. We have to show that this was not a homicide and kind of work our way down. So it's sometimes really difficult for families when they're just trying to grieve and we're kind of hovering and not allowing them to do some of the things that they feel like they need to at the time. So I feel like information is power. So trying to let them know exactly where we're at with the investigation, what comes next, what property we have, when they can get back in their house, a lot of kind of that follow-up the next day. And then also helping with crime scene cleanup or the biohazard companies, helping work with landlords and property managers to make those phone calls for the family, try to get that stuff set up so they don't have to, contacting their employers, things like that, just those little things that can seem extremely overwhelming for family. We try to take that on and help as much as possible. So we do a lot of that. Most of the contacts we have with a family after a suicide is pretty short term, because we do really try to get community resources set up. If there is just nothing, and sometimes that happens where a family says, I don't really have any other support, they're really kind of hesitant to get, counseling, or they don't want therapy, whatever is going through their mind, then we'll definitely stay on and at least do crisis work. But trauma support is very different than ongoing counseling and ongoing therapy. So we really try to walk them through that process too, that there comes to a point, there's only so much that we can do to support them. And then even in the long term, it is very common that sometimes even years after someone dies by suicide, we release property back, and we have to, by law, contact the family to say this firearm that was used is ready to be released. So we're very trauma informed with that. That's usually a call that I make. I try to support the family in person with doing that. So there's ongoing stuff as well, but we really try to take into account what's going to be best for the family. If I know Through Helpful Hearts or Community Resources is working with family, I will keep them involved, let them know the case updates as well, so that they have support in that realm. I think the only other question I get a lot, especially on scene and immediately following a death by suicide, is how the children are going to respond. So if there are kids in the home, or if this person had children, how are we going to tell them that? That is not something that we're technically trained to do, but I think there's a lot of education that can happen. So Grief Support of the Rockies has amazing resources on their website for children, like do's and don'ts, child speak, what they understand, depending on where they're at, age, what age group they're in. So I refer to that all the time. I give those resources out all the time. There's a ton of resources like that we try to just get in place for families to support them through that. So there's a ton of other referrals we have besides the ones I've mentioned today. So that is a very quick overview of what it looks like for us as far as the first response. So just like I would with any other case, I'm going to refer it now to Through Helpful Hearts, and I'm going to turn it over to Doreen. If you have any other questions though, please let us know. Please let me know. I will tell you that from the law enforcement perspective, and being a trauma specialist, I specialize in sexual assault and homicide, really is what a lot of. A death by suicide is sometimes the most traumatic calls that we go out on. And so we really try to keep the family as our top priority. So we try to be really trauma informed, and we definitely cannot do our job effectively without the community resources. I feel like the collaboration that happens in Larimer County doesn't always happen across the state. So we're extremely lucky to have all the resources we have in such a great relationship. So, all right, Doreen, it's all you.
I do just want to say quickly, we have 5 minutes left, but I will let Doreen go into the breakout session, or into the break time. We will have to stop promptly at, let's see, soon. At 11:10 is when we will stop promptly. So giving you about 15 more minutes, we'll go into the break session, Doreen.
Okay. Thank you, Kiera. Thank you, Britta. And awesome to meet you face-to-face, Britta. I've heard your name for months here at Three Hopeful Hearts, and now I have a face to go with that. And I just will do a really brief intro. My name is Doreen. I'm with Three Hopeful Hearts. I have a background in grief, loss, and trauma. I've specialized in that for 20 years. And I actually have a cousin who took his life through suicide and a godfather who did. And so it's my humble privilege to be here today and to talk with you. One of my very first calls while at Three Hopeful Hearts here was going out to a home in our community, actually in the town of Windsor. And today is the birthday of Manny, and his mother texted me today and said, please say my son's name. So a story that I'm going to share at the very end in about 5 minutes. I had fake names ready to use, as an ethical counselor would always do. And I actually have been in touch with this family, and she said, please honor. And I said, my intention for today is just to lift up him and every person who has lost their life to suicide and that supporting family. As you've heard today, you know, we're here all about postvention, and I just want to give you the essence of one community support's point of view of postvention and what we want to do and need to do our best to do no harm. In postvention, we are here to really be a pathway of communication to the family and to implement this in a safe way. How do we do this safely, whether it's grief support of the Rockies, whether it is pathways, whether it is you or whether it is me? We want to know how to respond by suicide by ideally knowing cultural differences, knowing spiritual and religious practices and differences, and most importantly, being present. It's not about us, it's all about them. And our presence when we enter that home, when we meet eye to eye and face to face with someone, we must be able to drop into our heart, not be thinking about, oh, them and how it happened, but drop into our heart and look into them and bear witness to whatever they must to just keep them knowing that we are here and our heartbeat is aligned with them and we are there to be present. We need to listen with our heart. We need to bear witness to whatever they're saying or doing, such as sacred silence. It's all about presence and companioning. And so we at Three Hopeful Hearts, we know grief very well, and we specialize in companioning and supporting bereaved families and for children. We also understand trauma and traumatic loss. And so that's so key for all of us. Obviously, we can know it from our mind, but we have to be able to experience it and not internalize it and not make it our stuff. We need to be comfortable with things. So some things are to be prepared to go in. It's making sure that we know enough, but not too much. Not to go in there like, yes, I heard, or yes, I read the article, or yes, this situation is all over the news. It's all about being there and listening. And I was told by, and I was going to use fake names, but I was told to mention, as I said, Manny. Today is his birthday, and he took his life less than a year ago. But what I was told from that family and what they appreciated most was that we understood that they spoke Spanish and English, and they were fine working with us. But we did make the efforts to find someone else. They had friends and family in the community. They had a church. They needed to know to just keep breathing, just breathe. They needed to hear that we would work with their church if needed. They needed to know that we would talk with their family and support the friends of Manny. We walked with her to help it make it safe for her to go through the archway of his room, where in the situation where he hung himself. And she discovered while we were there the buckle that was cut off and left behind. And she did not know the buckle was left there to the belt. And so being able to be present to no matter what you're going to see and what you're going to hear and the cries of the heart, it's not about, oh my, what is she feeling? I can't imagine this. It's about bearing witness and standing there to hold that sacred space and hold her pain for her when it was too hard to bear. I asked Manny's mother if she could speak to 20 or 200 people today, what she would want them to hear. And so I have down 11 comments she made. Hearing from her is more important than hearing from any of us because that's who we work with. She said, I loved when you told me to breathe. People need to hear to breathe. And we imitate breathing in and breathing out. That gave her life, minute by minute, second by second. She said, tell people to talk to others who know grief and who have lost someone to suicide. She said, tell them to take the time they need for visiting with friends, for visiting with families, for letting people come to the house. She said, tell people you're never ready to go back to work, but you're going to know when. It might be 1 week for someone and 7 months for someone else. But when people stop visiting is when I knew it was time for me to go back. She loved the idea of we encouraged her to write on a piece of paper when she was working and someone asked her an inappropriate question at an inappropriate time so she wouldn't have to verbalize, to write down your comment on a piece of paper and just hand it to them. And so she would write, no, my son Manny is no longer alive. I can't talk about it right now. Thank you for understanding and respecting where I am. And so she didn't have to say a word. She just had that in her pocket, and that was very helpful. She said she would tell that to anyone. She said, resume a routine as quickly as you can because it gets you up and out of bed. And she said, find someone to stay with. It was hard for her to go back home, so she stayed at her neighbor's house overnight, but could go in her house throughout the day. She also said, seek out support groups. She loves coming to Three Hopeful Hearts and our suicide-specific support group, but she also needs her faith community. She needs her cultural community. She needs her neighbors, and she desires to be able to teach and talk and share in the future. So seek out all the support you can get. She also said, let people know that there are chats and things online where she can pop into any time of the day or night. She said eventually books will help her, but it's hard to read right now. She does love The Addict's Mom and having daily short readings. And she said it's important for every bereaved parent or person to change your perspective and find meaning for your own life in time. She said, I need to live on. I need to honor him. So I need to find new meaning. And this is from a mother who's been bereaved for about 7 months. So in memory of Manny and all the people in this world and in our community, and most importantly, in your hearts and your acts of service, let's carry on. So be it.
I love that so much. Thank you both, Doreen and Britta. The work that you're doing is so important and so beautiful. If it's okay with the both of you, we will include your contact information in the follow-up email to everyone. Doreen and Britta's bio is also in the program on the Alliance website. If anyone has questions, I will let this session go until 11:10. So if anyone has questions, I'll look out for them in the chat and reiterate them. Again, I will share the main room session link in here. If everyone wants to refer back to the Alliance website, that will have all of the links for the following sessions. So thank you again, Britta and Doreen, for being here. My internet is unstable, so I hope you all can hear me, but I will stay here for the duration of the time. If anyone has questions, for about 5 more minutes, and then we'll switch it over to lethal means. All right, you get to hear my voice again. With no questions popping up in the chat, I will close it out with a script so I don't forget anything. So thank you again to Doreen and Britta for speaking with us today. We look forward to continuing the conversation around postvention. If you're interested in receiving a training and or joining a work group to be involved in next steps, again, please fill out the post survey where we will gather your information and follow-up email. This post survey also assists with the grant funding that keeps all of our programs free, so it's very much appreciated if everyone was to take that at the end of the symposium and give us any feedback you might have. Thank you for attending this session. Please refer to the Alliance website for information on the sessions following. All participants are now welcome to return to the main room to join an optional guided break until the start of the next breakout session at 11:15.